Do I need to be on Facebook?
Everybody, we're live, and thanks so much for joining us. This is Susan and Sue and Stephanie. Say hi, ladies.
Hi, ladies.
You are.
Thanks for joining us here at IEP for Parents. And tonight we are going to tackle the elephant in the room. And it's really, really a topic that's near and dear to our hearts because we work with a lot of families. And when we start to hear their story, and they don't ever come to us usually, occasionally, I'm going to backtrack. Occasionally families come to us because their child is struggling academically. But more often, we get families that reach out because their child has had a discipline issue, or they're not getting the services that they need that are on their IEP. But as we start to dig in and look down underneath the surface of why the child is really having a hard time, what we often discover is that they're a struggling reader. And the way that manifests and looks and how it presents in different kids, sometimes it's not always obvious that that's where the problem lies. So tonight we want to really talk about how many children in Florida, and I know we have people maybe watching us from different areas around the country, and we would love to hear the stories of other places and how reading is going for you guys. But the three of us live in Florida, we work in Florida, it's sort of what we know. And so this week we were faced with a few different things that made us have to look at data. And we know how exciting data is. I think I'm the only one who loves spreadsheets. Earlier today, my daughter and I were talking about art, and somebody was describing how art made them feel and the process of creating. And I'm like, it's just like making a spreadsheet. And my daughter looked at me and goes, only you would say that, Mom. So for any of you data nerds out there, know that you're in good company. And but anyway, tonight we really want to talk about those hard questions related to reading. So anyway.
Well, and you said, Susan, you said this week. Actually, we started looking, it was last week. We had some issues that bubbled up to the top. And so last week we reached out for a little bit of guidance from the state to say, here's the issues we're seeing, not one, not two, but many of them in many different places. Help us solve it. So it started, it's been going on for a long time, but it's elevated within the past week or so.
And I've had a rough week. So it really, when I say a week, it could have been a month. It could have been a year. It just,
I think we all feel that was, Susan. It's been
2020. It's
been
just
a
been one long
months.
week that never ended.
Exactly.
Yeah. So everybody can feel bad for us. The cat died. We had to have our cat put down. And this, was the first anniversary of my mom passing. So it's been a rough week. And I know I've been talking to a lot of different families and parents and things, and it seems like we all have had some event that is just hitting. And maybe it's that school's out and everybody is just finally dealing with all the life that you couldn't get to because you were so busy being a teacher and trying to work from home and drinking wine at midnight to cope with being a teacher and trying to work from home.
It can't happen.
Yeah. So again, I think what we want to start talking about is just some of the stories of the kids that we've seen. And then let's get to the numbers, because the numbers are dry, but they're important and they're a little bit shocking. Like I've been doing this for 20 years. Steph's been doing it for 20 years.
20 years.
Yeah, Sue has been, we've been partners in crime for a very long time. And And so you see the impacts of this on a pretty regular basis, but when you look at the numbers in black and white, it's still like, oh, really? Oh my God, how can this be? No, how can this be? And
Right.
so I also want to give a caveat, because we always have caveats here. First of all, if Stephanie talks to you, she's talking to you as an advocate and a mom. No legal advice happening from Miss Langer this evening.
Thank you.
And the second caveat I want to say that again.
Unless we need defense. I'm kidding.
And then
I will bail you out for protesting. Don't worry.
Okay. And the second caveat that I want to add is, I know we have a number of parents who follow us at IEP for Parents, and they might not be advocates of standardized testing. And, you know, we all have an opinion about whether we should subject our kids to standardized testing, or should you opt out, and should you have decisions. And, you know, I certainly have pretty strong opinions about that. But we are going to talk about data that was derived from kids participating in standardized testing. And the debate tonight for us isn't the merit of whether or not we should be testing, but we have been, you know, since No Child Left Behind went into effect in 2001, we have been doing standardized testing to look at the proficiency of our children's ability to read and do math. And tonight we're only going to really tackle reading, but the scores for math don't look very different when you dig into it. So I just wanted to give that caveat to any of you who are out there going, I can't believe they're going to talk about FCAT and FSA, but it's the measures that we have and that decisions are being made from. So we're just going to, you know, that is what we're going to discuss. But Sue, I know you and I have had some families we've worked with, and reading has been their struggle. Do you remember that little guy in a neighboring county that we went to a meeting for, and how that all went?
Which little guy?
Our third grader.
Yeah. So we had a mom reach out who had been in the struggle for a couple years, knowing her child wasn't reading on grade level, and very concerned and feeling like whatever was happening, it wasn't working. So we go to this meeting, and we walk in, and we're met, you know, with the huge school team that we're always met with, and the principal and the people from the district and the teachers and I don't know who else was, a lot of people. And basically they start with this great news for this little boy that he is not going to be retained. Now, this was a face-to-face meeting. So this was before COVID. This was, I don't know, sometime in the 2020 early. And great news. We want to share with you that we did whatever our district mandated test is, and little Johnny, I don't remember his name, isn't going to be retained this year. We don't have to retain him. And we were like, oh, that's great news. He doesn't have to be retained, but let's drill down and talk about what's really happening and where he's really performing and how things are really looking. And when we drill down into it, he's reading at a first grade level. And the team was like, it's great. We're going to move him up to fourth grade and everything's great. And let's kumbaya. And, you know, they just want you to have your hour-long meeting and agree to the goals on the document and agree to that what they're doing in tier 2 or maybe tier 3, but not usually tier 3 because we don't do that here, is working. And so in that instance, you know, we just thought, holy smokes, what's their just baseline look like if you can be reading at a first grade level and yet promote to fourth grade with a B in ELA? It just, so I mean, we get story after story after story, and the stories are disheartening and they're frustrating because parents that, you know, when my children were little, my son wasn't a reader, and I didn't know all the things that I know today. So my option was pull him out and get him private support and teach him how to read. And I did that, but not everyone has that ability. And I certainly didn't know, you know, then what I know now. And the cycle continues. So now we're running into all these young parents and it's the same story. If they can do private stuff, they do. But in this case, and in more cases that we're seeing, the districts are saying he's fine, she's fine. We're going to promote him and move along. So was that the story you wanted me to tell?
I think it's important for people to know who don't yet know. So they don't start standardized testing, so they're not tracking how kids are doing till the 3rd grade. And I think the reason they do that is because pre-K, kinder 1 and 2, they're teaching kids to read. Then in 3rd grade, the curriculum flips, and it's now, instead of teaching you to read, you're reading to learn. So instead of learning how to read in 3rd grade, the curriculum flips, and now you're reading to learn. And so it starts impacting whether or not kids can read in 3rd grade, because we start flipping the curriculum. So we're now teaching them through reading as opposed to teaching them how to read. And so we also start testing them in 3rd grade. And so we lose a lot of kids. So if you fail the FCAT or the FSA, there's mandatory retention for certain kids, and you're put into remediation if you don't get XY scores on the standardized testing. And then we start providing intervention. And I don't want to have a whole conversation about how bad the intervention we provide is, but putting that aside, we start providing intervention after they fail the 3rd grade FCAT, right? Or the FSA. It's the first time we actually address any potential reading issues, unless someone brings it to the school district's attention before that. So if a kid has a parent who advocates to have a kid tested, they might catch a reading issue earlier. And so I think part of our issue is we don't catch kids till they're already old. We've missed all these years where teaching a child to read could be happening very quickly with very little intervention if we were doing it quicker. So I think that's just how the system's set up. So we already have kids who enter, as we know, because we have Head Start programs. The whole reason for Head Start programs is we have kids who are starting behind the 8 ball, and they're supposed to get Head Start to catch them up to kids who grow up in houses that don't have a lot of reading involved. So you have kids who are already behind, and then we don't provide them any real intervention until after 3rd grade. So I think the whole system's kind of set up for certain kids to be tracked and to continue to have reading issues, when if we started earlier, we could catch some of these kids sooner, address whatever the deficit is sooner, and you're going to have a reader. But we don't do that. And so then we have kids who have behavior problems because they're frustrated, and they get further and further behind as they age in the system. It's just a perfect storm.
But there are a lot of things that they put into place in 3rd grade, and there's legislation that they put into place in 3rd grade of certain things that should happen if you don't meet benchmarks. And we'll talk about that later. But I think our story today is more about all these things that Florida puts in place and pats themselves on the back about, and the rest of the country looks to us as like some kind of a leader, which is shocking when we start telling you guys the numbers we drill down to.
When I also am obsessed with the numbers.
It's just a very low bar, and it's very concerning that
we're having a little bit of glitchiness tonight, guys. So there's like a delay between Sue and Steph and I. So if it's like we're talking over each other or weird,
I'm sorry.
It's just because the technology is being a little bit wonky. So be patient with us.
So my children are in their 20s. And when we started in Florida to have these high stake testings mean anything or matter or mandatory retention and all that kind of stuff, it's been a long time Florida's been doing this same stuff. So now what we're seeing, and we've been involved in a case with a student who has been years behind in reading, and it's been kind of in the media. We've had many parents all over really reaching out to us with their struggling high school students. So that leads us to the high school stories of many kids that are reaching out that have these very large gaps in their maybe 10th grade, their maybe 11th grade. And, when we dig into their ed records a little bit, we see the same story. It's kids that had difficulty in elementary school. Many teachers recommended them for, let's look at eligibility for this student. Let's do evaluations for this student. I've been doing interventions. They aren't working. And then you know what? The parents don't know, and the kid gets passed to the next grade, and the cycle continues. And back to Stephanie's point about we don't want to talk about interventions right now. That's a different story. But now they're in 10th grade, they're in 11th grade, and they are not readers, and they are not proficient, and their behaviors. And when we dig into the data, we find that they have not been accommodated or educated appropriately. And the students that we are able to get evaluations done with, we find they're reading at 5th and 6th grade levels, and they're in 10th and 11th grade. And what do you do with those students? What do you do? How do you remediate them? Because we aren't getting any good answers. So Susan.
So one of the stories that we have is that for 3 years in a row, every year in high school, just before FCAT or FSA, the student, they found a reason for this student to have a discipline problem, that he was not going to be there on the week that testing happened. And, when we looked at the ed record, because the mom said, hey, this has been happening. And, not that we don't always believe parents, but you go, really? Every year? And then it's like, oh my goodness, the truth is in the ed record, it's every year. We don't want this kid's score. And so if he's not here and he's out on suspension, not much we can do about it. And so I find it hard to believe that that's a unique story, because we've heard it from more than one family. And it doesn't happen just in one district. We see, that this is a pattern of behavior that occurs in, it's kind of like everybody knows the dirty little secret of how to not have these test scores. And so it's one of the games that we see.
Yeah, I think
yeah, go ahead.
I think it's important for people listening to understand also that there's no requirement to read on grade level to graduate high school. And I don't think that's a unique thing to Florida. So we have kids who have IEPs and learning disabilities, and we expect that they'll be behind and still end up graduating. What I think people don't realize is that there's no requirement for a person without an IEP, without a disability, to read on grade level and get a real regular high school diploma. There's no requirement. Sorry.
No, these kids that we're talking about are kids that don't have IEPs. These kids were never found eligible, and they should have been, in our opinion. I mean, recently we've helped some kids get found eligible, which, well, that's another story. But
right. So I think that because there's no requirement for kids to read, for me, when I say take back our public schools, it's really, we need to get back to the basics of actually teaching kids practical things like reading. I mean, This is what public schools are supposed to be doing. And I think there is a misnomer that they are doing it well. And what I am also obsessed with the statistics and the numbers, because for me, they're self-reported. And so this is what the school districts are willing to show us and make public. And they're so bad that I can't imagine what the numbers really would be if we had all of the kids counted. So there's a lot of reasons some certain groups of kids are not counted, or they're not counted in whole. So kids on alternative assessment or access points or modified curriculums, they're only counted in part, and only some kids are counted. Kids who are suspended or out of school for that day aren't counted. So we have a lot of kids who are invisible who aren't counted. And that doesn't include the many kids who leave the public school system because they're not reading and they're not getting any help or intervention to get those kids reading. And so we're not counting a lot of kids. So the statistics we have are the kids that they are counting, and they're self-reported. And we all know there's lots of ways to sort of mess with numbers and statistics. And these are the self-reported numbers that the school district shows us. And the results are horrifying. And we are graduating hundreds and hundreds of kids every year who don't read. And Florida is not unique. This is not a unique thing to Florida. It's definitely a nationwide problem. So that's why we wanted to talk about it tonight.
Right, and we want to talk about what's real and what people are willing to say at the level of people making decisions. Everybody wants to look at your school board members, right? When you go to the state, they pass it back down and they go talk to your local people. Your local people are talking to the district staff whose job it is to make these numbers look good. So let's talk about what stories they're telling the people that are hearing what the real numbers are and whether or not it's true. So I would be very curious to know throughout the state of Florida, how many school board members really know the numbers we're going to be talking about tonight. And if they do, are they okay with them? Because they're pretty dismal.
And, you know, in full disclosure, last week, I think it was last week, you know, my weeks are screwed up. We've already established that. But Sue and I have another family that we were working with, and this is another one of those kids that was a high school student, and a discipline thing happened, and he suddenly became a homeschooled kid for a while. And so we were like, we want to get this kid back in school. He needs to have certified teachers. He needs to have access to education. He was not a special ed kid at this point. And so we asked mom, you know, please get the education record so we can look at it. And what do we find? We find the pattern of intervention, suspension, discipline problems, behavior plan, interventions for reading, interventions for math. Oh, pass them on to middle school. You know, very few interventions, lots of behaviors. Then we get to high school. He barely even got a chance to be served in high school when they, you know, found a way to make him not count. Well, when we really got into it, and this child was eligible for an IEP. He's been, you know, he was found eligible finally in high school for an IEP, but it's like he's operating 4 or 5 years behind academically at this point. Where do we put him to serve him well? Our traditional high schools are not set up with the credit, you know, it's the credit factory. You know, we got to keep them with their cohort 4 years and out, or we're going to get dinged for our graduation rate. So we can't hold them back in high school because got to pass them along. And not that we're advocates of retention necessarily, but we are advocates of skill, like having mastery of skills. And so if we have a child that is coming to 9th or 10th grade reading at a 4th or 5th grade level, how do we remediate the missing skills while this child still gets access to high school level content and is prepared to graduate with a standard diploma in 4 years and be ready for post-secondary education and employment and independent living? How do we balance all of that? And so we called the state and we were like, please tell us who's doing this well in Florida and how we can replicate that. We don't want to reinvent the wheel. We're still waiting. We have not gotten a call back. You know, we would have thought that the people in charge of oversight at the state level would have had this answer readily. We need to teach kids how to read. Kind of thought that's what schools did. I'm not an educator, but that's sort of what I thought schools did. You know, and I obviously I'm being a little tongue in cheek there, but it was shocking that the answer was, well, we really need to check the data. I'm sure there's somewhere that's doing it well. We'll get back to you.
Well, and we specifically said, you know, we don't have a lot of time. We've got a lot of kids. We need answers. We've got to get back to these parents. You know, how long is it going to take you? You really should, we thought you know these answers. We thought this would be an easy question. Oh, just a day or two. It'll take me just a day or two and I'll get back with you. And that was a week ago. And we followed up with an email and the answer was, I'm working with Just Read Florida. And Just Read Florida is going to have the answers. But apparently they don't because they haven't called us back yet. So we started looking at Just Read Florida. And Just Read Florida has been around since I think like 2001. And was it one, Steph? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It coincided with No Child Left Behind.
They are all things reading to all things Florida. And I don't know who you are, Just Read Florida, but we really need some help with really reading in Florida because we've got a problem and we don't have answers. And I want to just say quickly, because some people are talking to me through text and through Facebook about like second graders that they were struggling readers in the public school system, so they McKay'd out. And they thought that they would have better hope McKaying out into private school, and they're not having better hope. So that'll be a different conversation. We'll explain that to you. We agree McKay isn't the answer to teaching your children to read. But it is important to stay on top of it because you don't want your second grader to be the struggling high school student we're talking about. You've got to get on the right path. So maybe, ladies, should we talk about some things that we know that work as far as reading? Because people are talking about they'd like to see more OG in the classroom.
And well, we can get to those, but really, before we get in, tonight, we are going to frustrate our audience. Be prepared. And actually, I'm going to say this now. If you want to be on a mailing list for an action plan, because we're working on that, if you send an email to Susan's at IEP for Parents, we are happy, and put reading in your subject line, we will send you what next steps we're going to recommend after this is over. The truth of the matter is we've known for 50 years the science of reading and how to teach kids how to read.
It's not new.
No. And over the years, I've had battles and won them and had them put the appropriate services in place for kids. And these children have learned to read. Children who the parents, I mean, I had one family, they spent $60,000 out of pocket on crazy, and I don't mean that the way it sounded. They did things that people told them would help their child. They were not the research-based things we know teach kids how to read. It took them a long time to get to those programs, but they did like, well, I'm not going to start naming things, but it was more of the snake oil kind of stuff that people spend thousands of dollars on. And it, you know, it seems to make some help. Maybe it's because their children are getting some one-on-one attention, but it doesn't really solve the problem they're trying to work on. Well, we finally got this child by 4th grade into the exact kind of reading program that she needed, one-on-one, multisensory, explicit, filled in all the gaps. She was able to graduate high school with a standard diploma, and she could really read. And she has, you know, is being successful in her life. But I've had that same story with different kids at the same school multiple times over those 20 years. And every time we have the conversation, it's like we've never had it before.
It's in the water.
Definitely it's learned helplessness, or I don't know, intentional ignorance. I don't know what it is, but I definitely have seen over the years a change in how we're addressing reading with kids in schools. And so I think this is also probably emblematic and across the country, not just Florida, but what we've seen is a reduction of highly trained reading specialists or teachers that have been around a long time who are really good at teaching reading. And so they'll have a resource classroom or they'll have a reading classroom. And so instead of that, what I've seen is kids be put on computers with computer programs, iReady or Achieve 3000, and that's supposed to, quote, teach them how to read. But we know they don't teach kids how to read. And so while they sometimes can be used for diagnostic measures to try to figure out where the gaps are, there, and this is just my personal opinion, I think we've gotten away from teachers teaching kids how to read. And I think it's been a real disservice to the children. And now when I go into a school and I said, so who's your reading specialist? They have no idea what I'm talking about. They're like, what do you mean? What's that? We have reading endorsement. And there's all kinds of problems with Florida's reading endorsement for teachers. It's not holding up well. It's not aging well, this reading endorsement. It's really not giving the teachers the skills they need to teach kids how to read. And so I think because there's a dearth of teachers who know how to teach kids to read, it's really, I have been able to see it over the years, that it's really hard to get trained teachers to step in when you can identify the problem, where the gaps are, to actually teach the child how they need to be taught to read. And so I think it's sort of like a perfect storm, but it's frustrating for me because that's literally the reason kids are there in school buildings, is to learn how to read. Like, this is our basic job, right?
Right,
Of the
'cause
school.
if you can't read signs, if you can't read instructions, if you can't read recipes, if you can't read a job application,
If you can't read out loud in class, you will throw your pencil to avoid it. If you have to solve a math problem on the board, but you can't read it, then you're throwing the eraser or you're cursing out the teacher instead of addressing. So much behavior, in my opinion, that we see from kids are because they're frustrated because they are not reading. And so instead of addressing the problem of being able to read, they express themselves, albeit inappropriately, through behavior. Because for me, behavior, I've said this before, is communication. So they don't have the skills to communicate. I don't know how to read, or they're embarrassed, or whatever the reason. And then we have kids who are quote misbehaving, when really, in fact, and then we start addressing their behavior problems, right? We give them behavior plans, and because their behavior is so interfering, we never get to address the underlying academic issue, which is generally, when we look at it, a failure to read.
Oh, and speaking of behaviors, so we were working with another student who was a high school student that was never taught to read, who was in intervention forever. And we were working with the team, we thought, collaboratively to try to get this kid services. And he was frustrated. He had avoidance behaviors. So he would put his head down on the desk, or he'd put his hoodie over his head, or, nobody wants to be the dumb kid. Some don't want to be the bad kid, but they would rather be the bad kid than the dumb kid. And this kid just wanted to be left alone. And so even though we were working with the team, they just started suspending the kid. Now,
or the kid's lazy, they don't try. I mean, you have all of these things we say to kids instead of saying, hey, are you having trouble reading? Why don't I help you read? Like, some of it to me seems to defy logic, but
so
it's just a disservice to our kids. But then we don't
report these suspensions during that time. So it's kind of a miracle how it all happens. But
so Susan, can you say the statistics? Yeah, can we say the statistics?
I was going to say. So now that everybody's heard us pontificate for a bit, statewide for third grade in last school year, if you had to guess, for all kids, not broken out in any subgroups, what would you guess was the percentage of kids that were proficient readers in third grade?
So you would want, like, what, 80%, 90%? That's your job. How are we doing?
So in Florida, for third graders, overall in 2019, 58% of our children are proficient readers.
Which means 50 something are not, or 49 something are not.
And if
almost half.
If we look at 10th graders for 2019 overall in the state of Florida, 53% of our students are proficient readers.
This was before COVID, before we even knew of COVID.
Right, COVID was not a thing when these numbers were captured. And I know there's going to be this big push, we've already started to hear it, that kids can't read because of COVID. Well, 45 days worth of a virus, it did not cause all these children to lose their reading skills. I'm certain if you had a struggling reader and things were starting to get put in place, COVID didn't make it better, but it didn't cause these statistics. It didn't even exist when we captured them.
Right, and 2019 is not an anomaly. This is data consistently for the last decade.
Right. And so the way, when No Child Left Behind came into effect, the way it was supposed to work is that over the course of time, the percentage of children that would become proficient as readers was moved up. So we started with a lower bar, and each state set their own benchmarks for what they wanted to get to and how quickly they were going to get there and what instruments they were going to use to measure were they getting to those benchmarks. And so at that time, Florida had decided on the FCAT, and now we do the FSA. But by 2014-15, 100% of kids were supposed to be proficient readers across all subgroups when the law originally came out. Now, I can remember being in meetings, because I like sitting on committees. It kind of goes with the data nerd, probably, where we said, how can 100% of anybody be proficient on any given day? It seems like an unreasonable thing to expect. But I could live with 90%. I mean, I hate it for those 10% of kids, but 90% would maybe be okay on, because it's a snapshot in time. So it might just be that those kids are having a bad day. But I'd like to talk a little bit about, I drilled down into some of the bigger districts in Florida. And the reason I looked at the bigger districts is because it represents a lot more kids in a group. And typically these bigger districts have more resources in order to serve, kids. And some of our small rural counties, they might have, they just don't have a lot of resources to maybe serve children. Although maybe they do more one-on-one, they might actually be better at it. I don't know. But for the purposes of this, I looked at Broward, Miami-Dade, Hillsborough, Manatee, Orange, Palm Beach, Pinellas, St. John's, and Sarasota. So a kind of a smattering from around the state of Florida. So anybody that's watching that doesn't know Florida, it's East Coast, West Coast, North and South. We tried to capture the whole geographic region. And we looked at over time, so the last 5 years, what did data look like for different groups of kids? So in just picking randomly Broward County, because it's the first one that came up, in 3rd grade, and I'm going to kind of stick to 3rd grade because that's our first time we're looking at our children. If you were a white girl and you did not have a disability in 3rd grade in Broward County, in 2014-15, 78% of those children were proficient readers. But if you happen to have a disability, that rate drops to 43%. So, it's still a white child that's a girl in Broward County, but she has a disability. And it's all categories. So whoever took the test that had a disability, only 43% of those children showed up as proficient. Now, if you happen to be a boy, so 78% of our girls without disabilities were proficient. But if you're a boy in Broward County in 3rd grade, that's white, that doesn't have a disability, it's only 72% proficiency. So a 6% difference between the boys and girls in that category. And if you happen to be a boy with a disability, it drops to 41% of our kids are proficient. So then I want to give me a minute because this is a really big spreadsheet.
Is Broward the one that has a heavier Hispanic population, or is that Miami-Dade? I can't remember when we were looking at these.
Statistically, Miami probably has more.
Does it? Okay, because yeah.
So if we look at Hispanic girls in 3rd grade in Broward County in 2014-15 that don't have disabilities, 63% of those girls are proficient, compared to 78% of white girls. And if we look at Hispanic girls with disabilities, that 63% drops to 28%.
Wow.
And if you're a boy that's Hispanic without a disability in 3rd grade, you're at 56% proficiency. But if you happen to have a disability, it drops to 24%. And then if we look at,
okay,
if we look at Black children in Broward County in third grade in 2014-15, if you're a girl without a disability, you have a 45% chance of being a proficient reader. But if you have a disability, it drops to 14%. And if you are a Black male in Broward in third grade, your level of proficiency, if you don't have a disability, is 34%. And if you have a disability, it drops to 12%. And I picked on Broward just because they were the first in line. But those numbers are, pretty similar as we look at other counties. The difference in children.
So, Susan, it's not the school district's fault because they don't pick their blueberries and they get all the kids from all the backgrounds and they're stuck with what they get. So we can't blame the school district for having such a wide variety of kids, right?
But their job is to teach all of our children. And so
But Susan, the standardized testing are written to benefit white kids. So it's not the system's fault. It's the test's fault, right, Susan?
Well, but the system picks the test. And so let's make test. If it's really the test that's the problem, then let's not pick instruments that are racially biased. And if it's not the test that's the problem, then let's not have multiple kids that we see every day who haven't been taught to read. So, if I would have never dug into the statistics presented by the test, if we wouldn't have been seeing real life examples of these children every day who are being kicked out of school, who are
dropping out
of school, who are encountering the juvenile justice system, who, I sat on a committee in my county for kids that are under 18, but they were being charged as adults in the criminal justice system. And I'm talking 13, 14, 15-year-olds that had not been convicted of anything. They had been accused of, they were being charged with a crime, awaiting a hearing before a judge, yet they were sitting in jail, often not getting educational services that they were entitled to. And most of those children had disabilities and could not read on grade level.
But Susan, if they have disabilities, it's not our fault. The school district can't be held responsible.
Well, there was a federal law passed in 1975 that was back then the Education for All Handicapped Children Act that we now know as IDEA, that says all of our children are entitled to a free, appropriate public education. And most people, even lay people who aren't educators, if you ask them, so what's an appropriate education? My guess is that expectation is our children could read. And I get it that some of our children acquire skills at a slower rate than others. And some of our children have to be taught in a different way how to learn new material. But that's what we expect. We expect.
It's been 20 years of a trend that isn't going in the right way, and we aren't doing anything to fix what we're doing wrong. We want to pretend it's not a problem. We want to pretend we can put these kids in front of a computer screen, and just because they achieve some arbitrary, very low bar that says they can read, but they can't read. It's a problem. And we're spending millions and millions of dollars on these computerized platforms, and we're telling these teachers, you've got to stick your kid in front of this computer and you've got to take these scores and it shows they can read. And we're showing you data that it isn't true. It just isn't true. So we need to start doing something differently. And we need to start
Mhm.
be holding people accountable to the additional money these schools are getting to teach these kids to read, and they're not doing it.
So I just want to go through another set of statistics so that people can see that these scores are not an anomaly. So I went to the last year that we have data for, which is 2018-19. And I decided to look at, and I haven't actually looked at these scores until just this minute. So I don't know what exactly they're going to say, but I bet you I could predict because I've looked at some of the other counties. So I'm looking at Manatee County scores, and I'm going to look at 10th graders this time. So we looked at the third graders and we saw that at the beginning of this, when we're doing the first kind of probe to see are we on track, that maybe we weren't quite making the mark. But now I'm going to look at 10th graders. And so we've had, third grade and fourth grade and fifth grade and sixth grade and seventh grade and eighth grade and ninth grade, and most of 10th grade that we could have figured out how to teach these children to read. So we would think we'd be really near that 100% proficiency by the time they're in 10th grade. Seems reasonable to me. And for educators out there that might be listening to this, please know that this discussion is not really about teachers. This conversation is about tools and resources and the system, and making sure that you have what you need to be able to do the job that the community expects from you. And so if you don't have the right professional development, or you don't have the right curriculum tools, or you don't have the support services that you need to be able to serve the children that are in front of you, how can we expect to hold you accountable for your job if we don't give you the tools to do your job? So know that all three of us are super pro public education and public teachers, but if the system isn't designed for success, then it is our job to hold the people that are making decisions accountable. And that's really what this discussion is about. So when I look at 10th graders in Manatee County for last school year, and if you are a white girl in Manatee County in 10th grade, there is a 74% proficiency rate for 10th graders in reading. But if you are a 10th grade white girl that has a disability, it's a 14% proficiency rate.
Wow. What say you, Manatee?
And so if you are a boy in Manatee County that doesn't have a disability and you're white, it's a 63% proficiency rate. So 10% below the girls. And if you are a boy with disabilities, they must be doing a good job with the boys, because we're at a 25% proficiency rate for boys with disabilities. And, I don't know why I'm like excited at 25%, but compared to the girls at 14, it's all relative, I suppose. So let's look at our Hispanic students. And if you are a girl in Manatee County, a Hispanic girl without a disability, your likelihood of being proficient, well, not likelihood, your actual proficiency rate is 41%. But if you are a girl with a disability that's Hispanic in Manatee County, the proficiency rate is 2.4%.
How do they even get to the 10th grade? So in Manatee County, we were in an IEP meeting and we were trying to get our kid help who was failing everything year after year. And the AP actually told us, we don't have him on tier 3 because nobody in this school is on tier 3. And further, he's not in our lowest quartile. That was a boy. Do you remember that?
I do. So if you're a male in 10th grade in Manatee County and you're Hispanic and you don't have a disability, there's a 34% proficiency rate for reading. And if you have a disability, it is a 6.8% proficiency rate in 10th grade.
And yet we graduate these kids somehow.
So if we look at our Black students in Manatee County, if you are a girl that is Black in Manatee County and you don't have a disability, we're at a 36% proficiency rate in reading. And if you have a disability, we're at 9.1%. And if you happen to be a Black male in Manatee County in 10th grade without a disability, our reading proficiency rate is 24.3%. And if you have a disability, it's 7.9%.
And
And
people are
Go ahead.
people are asking that are tuning in later, I think, where we got this data. This data came from the state database. And as Stephanie pointed out so eloquently, it is self-reported data within the state database. So it's really as good as it's going to get.
Well, it's as positive as they can make it, right? It's self-reported.
And this was directly, we were, on the Florida Department of Ed's website and created a table from their database. It's their numbers. I mean, we didn't
Right.
numbers up.
No, you can go look. It's Florida Department of Ed, fldoe.org, I believe. And you can pull all the statistics that are sitting there. They're not always up to date, although we were able to get last year 18-19, but they're definitely there. And they don't make it completely easy to find, but it's there. You just have to look for it.
Yeah, and so, these numbers are the numbers that they're reporting. When I look at some of our, I looked at 10th grade in Miami-Dade, and for their Hispanic students, if you are a girl in 10th grade without a disability, and I'm doing this because it's a larger population of Hispanic kids. Manatee's population is not quite as large as close to Miami-Dade, but their 10th graders in 18-19, Hispanic girls, it was 68% proficiency. It dropped to 29% if you had a disability. Hispanic males, it was 61%. And if you had a disability, it dropped to 29%. So, I mean, Manatee's group of kids is a lot smaller group that we're looking at proficiency wise, but then, I mean, the numbers are not significantly better in Miami-Dade. And when I look at Palm Beach for that same period of time, and their population seems to be more diverse. It's about a third between white students and Black students and Hispanic students. It's not quite as skewed in the numbers of kids in a group. And there, for Hispanic students, girls at 61%, girls with disabilities, it's 23%, Hispanic males, it's 52%, and if you have a disability, it's 22%. And, and if we look at Black students with disabilities in each of those counties, the percentages are right around 15% proficiency rate for Black kids with disabilities in 10th grade in both Miami-Dade and Palm Beach. So again, these numbers that we're going from county to county are not anomalies. They're not like one county just really understand how to do this. We don't know how to teach our children to read proficiently.
No, we do know our public schools aren't utilizing the known methods to teach kids to read. They're making the decision to not utilize what has been known for a long time of how kids learn to read.
Well, and they aren't being honest about the outcomes. I mean, we need outrage about this. They're not honest about the outcomes, and they've got lots of support. They've got lots of financial support. We'll get to that later. All right.
No, but I think it's just parents that think you get a degree and you're going to read on grade level. Even kids on modified curriculum, their parents don't quite understand that doesn't mean they have to learn to read on grade level. So you can graduate a student on a modified curriculum who's reading on a second grade level, and the school district seems to be just fine with that. But we also have kids who are not on modified curriculums. We have kids with no IEPs who are also graduating, not reading on grade level. And so there's basic things that we need as adults to be able to read. No application, I think anything that's like a legal document or a form, it's going to be at a bare minimum at an 8th grade reading level required. So there's many kids who are graduating with regular diplomas who aren't reading even at an 8th grade reading level, let alone a 12th grade reading level. So why is it happening? And I think there's a number of reasons. There's a number of reasons. I don't think it's an easy answer, but I don't think we can blame the kids. And I think we have a real bad habit of blaming the children, that we don't get to pick our blueberries, so we can't keep the best kids. Well, you have these kids for 12 years, some of them, and that's not an excuse. You get them a long time. You have a lot of time with them. So I don't buy that. The tests are biased. Okay. Yeah, but you have them for all these years. What are you doing in between the testing?
Well,
We have unconscious bias that exists. There's tons of research about unconscious bias. We have the issue of lower expectations for certain groups of children. So when No Child Left Behind was passed and the states were able to set their own expectations, they set lower expectations for African American students and Hispanic students and students with disabilities. And there is tons of scientific evidence-based research that shows when you set lower expectations, you get lower outcomes, and it creates the opposite effect of what we hope kids do. But I find it frustrating as an advocate that the schools are failing at their basic job, which is to make sure kids can read and be functional, productive members of society when they get out.
And then the other thing that I want to say is in Florida, one of the things we decided was a good idea was to give our schools grades, right? School districts get grades, schools get grades, teacher pay gets tied to how kids do on these tests. Again,
Bonuses to schools.
it could be
make
a whole
improvements.
different Zoom about my opinion on whether that should be true. But Sarasota, which is the county we know best because Sue and I live here, is an A-rated district. Lots of people, look at Sarasota as a place to move to because of our schools. And in our A-rated district, overall in 2019 for 3rd grade, 70% of our kids were proficient readers. And if you looked at the 10th grade number, it dropped to 63% of our kids are proficient readers in an A-rated district. And so my point is, I'm not sure we should be rating school districts by letter grades, but if we're going to, why does that earn you an A? And if I go to those same numbers, but because they're just shocking, and I look at 10th grade girls in Sarasota County, 80% of our white females without disabilities are proficient readers. However, if we look at students with disabilities that are white girls in Sarasota, that number drops to 28%, from 80% to 28%. If you're a boy without a disability that's white, it's 71%. But if you have a disability, it drops to 21%. Why is it a 50 percentage point difference if you have a disability? Hispanic students in Sarasota County, girls without disability, without disabilities, it's 60%. If you have a disability, it drops to 17%. Our Hispanic boys, it's 49%. And if you have a disability, it drops to 10%. If we look at our Black children in Sarasota, the 10th grade girls without disabilities, we're at 44%. But if you have a disability, it drops to 8%. And if you're a Black boy in Sarasota in 10th grade, you're at 38% proficiency. But if you have a disability, it drops to 3.1%. And
Susan, what does proficiency mean? That they're reading at or above grade level?
So on the Florida standardized assessment, they get levels 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and proficiency is a level 3 or above. So if you scored less than a level 3, you are not considered a proficient reader. And the instrument is as good as the instrument, but why are subgroups of children scoring so differently on this test? Sarasota's the data, obviously, we looked at very, very closely. We, in 2015-16, our Black students with disabilities in 10th grade had a 0% proficiency rate.
What?
No,
Say that again.
we had a 0% proficiency rate.
You had not one
What year was that?
Black student reading at
I'm
At or
going
above
back
grade
to
level.
I'm pulling it up to make sure that I don't speak.
I'm sorry. You cannot blame blueberries or test standards on that, or the kids for that.
Oh, and we have parents saying that it was blamed on, she's told it's due to poor parenting.
Right, of course. If parents just, were better. I mean, yes, there are a lot of complicated factors that impact children's education and ability to access education, but I don't think any of those things that are real explain away this discrepancy between where certain kids are functioning and where others are functioning.
Well,
there's no way to explain it. The 0% efficiency for African American students, there's no way.
and the blame shifting is real. I mean, we see it all the time in every meeting. So don't take that personally when you're blamed for whatever it is.
No, I've gotten to the point where if they start like attacking me personally, then I'm on the right track. Like if you start blaming me, then that means I'm asking the right questions because I've made you uncomfortable that you're now attacking me. I think that we need to start asking some really hard questions. What is the purpose of our public schools? Why are they so militarized? Is it working? Are kids learning? The numbers don't bear out. The numbers do not support. And I am a huge proponent of public schools, so please don't misunderstand. I think the privatization of the public school system through the vouchers programs in Florida has been devastating. Not only are we pulling some of our best kids, but we're pulling a ton of funding to go to private schools through vouchers and scholarship programs. I do not agree with them. And I think the money needs to return to the public school system. The kids need to return to the public school system. We need to integrate more than we integrate. True integration, not breathing the same air integration. And I think the numbers support what we're saying.
And some of the irony is when we get these kids that are not reading and they're in 10th grade and we're begging for help from anybody who will listen to us. And some people do call us back, but when they call us back, what they tell us is, what about the charter school? Why don't you send that kid to the charter school? So it's hypocrisy because you want to blame the charter schools, but then you want to send the kids that are low performing to the charter schools. I mean, we just need to fix this broken system. We need to shine a light on it and we need to fix it. So I'm sorry, we interrupted you. You were going to check the 0%.
I did, and I was right. And but if you are receiving public dollars, whether whether you are a traditional public school, or you are a charter school, or you have accepted our kids because you've gotten voucher dollars to educate them, wherever those children are, whatever seat they're sitting in, it is your responsibility to prepare those children to become citizens in our community that are functional and that can read and that can do math and that have skills that will contribute to society. And that doesn't mean occupying a jail cell for privatization of prison stock. We have to do what is right and make sure that our children, the gifts that each of them bring, that our community benefits from those. And when we fail to educate our children, we don't just fail them and their families, we fail our communities. And it costs us so much more as a society to take care of these children as adults in whatever system they land in, because than it would to just educate them to begin with. So, I mean, we could fight forever about, should there be charters, should there not be charters, should there be vouchers, should there not be vouchers? But the reality is those tax dollars are going to somebody, and their job is to teach our kids to flip and read. And they're not doing it.
It's literally their only job. That's literally their only job. And I think it's a good point. We're not blaming teachers. We're not blaming any individual administrators. This isn't a personal attack on any particular district or any particular person. But I do think it says something if we have a problem across our state through self-reported numbers, that they're telling us these are their numbers, their best foot forward, right? And we have such discrepancy between certain groups of kids, and nobody's really that proficient. I mean, I guess we're okay with 80% for some groups, but are we? Are we okay with 60%? Are we okay with 18%? Like 0%? I just think we're failing our kids, and it's frustrating.
We are. So we've known, for doing this for a very long time, that the only way we're going to fix this is parent voices uniting and making a difference and demanding change. Because right now, clearly, we've got people paid throughout the state of Florida that serve on school boards, and you know, we've got really, really good people that are funding and giving money to the school boards and trusting them that they're fixing this problem. But as we dug into the data, they're not fixing this problem. So what we need to do is shine a light on it, unite, and force them to make a difference and actually educate our kids. Now, that said, you're going to laugh at this, Susan, and we need to laugh. We've been very serious for a long time. Erin Cowan wants the link to the data. She's looking, she's trying. She went to the DOE. She said it's like trying to find the lost city of Atlantis.
Yeah.
So
Well,
that's intentional, Erin. They make it difficult. Yeah.
It's intentional.
When we're off the air, I will put the link to the statistics section so people can easily get to it and look at themselves. I will tell you, it took me a day, literally a day, to play with their system and figure out how to get this data to extract into a spreadsheet that was somehow usable. And somebody more technically proficient than I might be able to do it more quickly. But I'm old, and it was a stressful week. And I was very thankful to finally get it in a format that was usable. That allowed us, and just so you know, guys, the reason I didn't post this is it's like 3,300 columns wide or some crazy number like that. It's a really, really wide, big spreadsheet that's really tiny. So it would just be hard.
Oh, she froze.
Does she keep freezing? Other people are wanting us to go to the media. So if you guys want to send any media to us, feel free. We're not hiding anything. We're an open book.
We're definitely an open book. And I think the only thing I want to say is if you think your kid's having trouble reading, they are. You're probably not crazy or exaggerating or being over aggressive or helicoptery of your kid. They like to blame parents a lot. And so I think the statistics will bear out that there is really a dearth of education related to reading. So if you think your kid is having an issue, they probably are. And there are very scientifically researched, evidence-based programs that work to teach kids to read. They are not astronomically expensive. They don't have to be. They're not rocket science. They're not new. They've been around a long time. And so I think asking for them is the first step. I think the earlier the better, because it's much easier to teach a kid phonics or some missing building blocks of reading when they're 5 than when they're 15. It takes much less intervention if we do it early. So I think early intervention is always my mantra related to reading deficits, but we've got to capture them early. We've got to find them earlier than third grade, in my opinion. And then once we find them, whatever grade it is, there needs to be a systematic way to address the deficits. And that does not exist. And so I think we blame the parents and the teachers and the kids, we blame all these things. But the reality is that you will go to a high school and we'll say, okay, what's the plan to close the gap between where they're functioning and where their grade level is? And they look at you, the school administration will say, that doesn't fit. That doesn't fit into our circle. So I don't know what you're talking about. And so I think we have to get away from, there's only one way a kid graduates. There's only one way we're going to teach a kid. We're going to put them on the computer. I think we need to get away from that. But I don't know if it's going to happen unless the parents demand it, take back our public school systems. Let's have real systems in place for kids that don't quite fit on the conveyor belt, because it's worth it. Like Susan was saying, the impacts of kids who aren't reading, who don't graduate, who drop out, have such an economic impact on our communities, the psychological impact on that student, and long-term impact on that family unit and the next generation that comes after them. And it doesn't, we're not talking about a lot of money. We're not talking about a lot of change. We just have to almost get back to the basics, an old-fashioned educational system focused on kids being kids and teaching them how to learn and how to read. I don't think it's complicated.
It's got to stop being about money and data collection and all those things that it's morphed into. Our kids have to stop being money generating widgets for school districts, and the school districts need to refocus on what their priority should be and what the community is supporting them being. And we've gone off the path.
And we have to bring all the kids that have left back in. So all the kids who have been kicked out through suspension or through the criminal justice system, they need to come back in. All the kids who are in homeschool programs that should not necessarily be there need to come back in. Like, we need to reinvest in our public schools and bring all these kids back in so we have a functioning society.
And just know, I don't know, I'm sorry, I lost internet connectivity, but I don't know, when you say homeschool, you're talking about those parents, not that homeschool is their choice necessarily, but those parents who
lost her again.
Oh no, I can hear her.
Susan,
I hear.
Well, we've lost her. I'm going to share with you that
was not safe to be in public school. So,
or they weren't right, either not safe
being
for
served.
Right, or not being served. Like, they've tried the intervention, they've done the RTI, they've sat through 3 years of remediation on a computer, and their kid's still not learning. So they feel desperate enough, like Sue did with her own kid, pull them out if they can afford it, get their kid reading, and then they talk about re-entering at some point into the public school system. That's not the answer, in my opinion, because one, most people can't do that. And two, we shouldn't pull kids out to teach them to read. Their whole purpose of being there is to teach them to read. And so the system needs to be better. Pulling kids out because they're not learning is not the answer to me. I'm sorry, Sue, go ahead.
I'm just going to say there's a comment from someone who said a group of parents went to their district and they were talking about this very issue. And the answer from the district was, no other district is doing this better. So that's not okay. I mean, that's the answer we got basically from the state when we started talking to them. They were like, this is a nationwide problem. Well, yeah, it might be a nationwide problem, but it's a problem here. We know how to fix it. We're choosing not to.
But it's also an economic issue for our communities. If we don't have functioning adults, we don't have workers. If we don't have workers, we have, people who aren't being productive members of the society. There's numbers, and I apologize for not having them offhand, but there's numbers attached to when a kid drops out, how much economic impact that kid has on that community he lives in. And the numbers are just as bad as the statistics related to reading. We have lots of issues related to our communities and our society. One of them is the fact that our public schools are not educating kids to be productive, functional members in our communities. That's their whole purpose. If they're not doing the basics, then what are we doing to our children?
There's
I'm
the
sorry,
question.
that's kind of a bummer. I know that's kind of a bummer.
But you
but-
know what? And we love our public schools.
Yes.
Like, it's such
And
a
our
dichotomy.
teachers. Yes.
And our teachers. And so I think we want to make sure that, one, do we have any burning comments or questions we haven't gotten to?
Well, somebody's commenting that they've been fighting for this for 10 years and they know Fiddlers has all of these programs sitting on their shelves collecting dust.
Right. That we know how to teach kids to read. We've known for many, many decades how to teach kids to read. We just have to demand it back in our schools. And so
That's
I
right.
think that it's not complicated. It's just, I think that whole thing with cracks in something, we bring light to it and then we can change it. We're trying to bring light to the issue so that we can change it. I don't think the fix is complicated. I don't think the fix is hard. I don't think the fix is expensive. We just have to talk about it, shine some light on it, bring some attention to it, and just do it. Like, we just have to decide this is a priority and do it. There's plenty
It's
of
a
money.
culture shift. It's a culture shift.
Yes.
Yeah. It's a culture shift from people saying, I've spent God knows how many millions of dollars on this computer program, and now I've got to show that we've got results from this computer program. And you know what? At some point you have to say, I made a mistake. What we need to do is revisit this because we don't have the outcomes that we thought.
Right. Or the reality is computers are our lives. Our kids have the internet.
We
My
had.
kids
And if your staff has been telling you, school board members, that
Internet's really wonky tonight. I know we all keep fading in and out. But when we were talking to the state, trying to figure out how to help the kid and talk about the high school problems we were having, they said to us, they've interviewed groups of students and said, what would help you? And every student that they've talked to had said, we hate computer time for reading. We want to be with a teacher. It is so much better to learn from a caring teacher that can, because when you can't read, it's not just an academic deficit, it's an emotional deficit. Kids know when they're not able to keep up with the kids that can read. And so they need that support of the caring adult, that it's going to be okay. And we're going to teach you how to do this, in addition to being taught how to read.
absolutely couldn't said it better myself. It's not about fitting these kids into a system. I get a lot for high school. Oh, well, the high school student doesn't want to look different, or the high school student doesn't want to get pulled out, or the high school student has to learn how to advocate for themselves. That may all be true, but the high school student needs to know how to read. And that has to be the priority. And if you make it a system that acknowledges it and has a program in place, they won't be embarrassed. They won't be pulled out. They're going to be grateful that you're finally addressing their needs. I don't buy that these kids can skate on through because they're, quote, embarrassed or they don't want to be pulled out. No, they need to read. That's your job. That's literally the whole reason they're there.
We have to start elevating this conversation to the colleges that are teaching teachers how to teach kids how to read. So that's another conversation that we need to have, because in a future time, because we all agree, we know what works, but we've just shifted the focus, but we're failing. We're failing our kids, we're failing our families, we're failing our communities, we're failing the people that are funding extra programs, because we're not giving real data on what the outcomes are for these kids. It needs to become a real conversation. We need to point to what works, and we need to work together as communities collaboratively to get kids reading.
So with that, I think we've extended our hour a little bit. We're a little over.
Yes,
That's usual for us. Again, if you want to be part of the conversation going forward and to talk about next steps, please just shoot us an email at susans@iepforparents.com and put reading in the subject line. And that way we can add you to the mailing list. And I say that we're not going to send you products or unsolicited, just the next steps of what's going on. And we thank you for caring about kids in Florida and across the country. We want to make our schools a better place for our children, and we can't do it without you and without being, you have to push sometimes from the outside to make a system as big as education shift in a different direction. And so together, I know we can make a difference for our children.
I just wanted to say one more thing before we hang up with everyone tonight. I know we had talked a while ago about having sort of like a plan or some strategies for re-entering school for the 2021 school year. We don't know what's happening yet, so we've been unable to kind of pull our thoughts together on that. But as districts are starting to announce what their plans are, and as the governor has made some announcements about it, as it becomes more clear, we have not forgotten, and we will be putting that together. But as things clarify, we'll be in a better position to give you some real advice on that.
Thank you. And so if anybody has questions or comments, please leave them on the Facebook page for IEP for Parents. If you are a parent, we do have a group, and it's kind of parents only. So IEP for Parents, the group, if you look for us on Facebook, there's a couple of questions we ask you to answer so we know you're a real human, and that you're going to be nice. Those are sort of our requirements, and you're a mom or a dad. And then there also, the website is back up. We were down yesterday for a little bit, but if anybody checks us out at www.iepforparents.com, it is up and running. And we will put the link to how to find the stats on the Florida Department of Ed site when we're finished here. Thanks everybody for tuning in tonight, and we'll be back soon. Watch for our Facebook Live announcements on the Facebook page. Good night.
Thank you.
Have a great night.
Bye.